course, I said to them I wasn't going to watch JoJo, and god damn it, we're watching JoJo. Christ, kill me, please. What? What's he gonna use it on? What is going on in his show at this? What is going on? Which one is the JoJo? Is that guy JoJo? Probably not. Oh, oh, whoa, oh. Ooh. I gotta watch more of this show. I gotta watch more of this. This show is actually dope. It encompasses manliness, but you can be flamboyant in your manliness. JoJo is flamboyant masculinity. These guys are some of the manliest niggas you know, but they can just stunt the nigga.
Oh, hello there. YouTube game stand name ASAP Rocky here, back at it again with another ora for your face. So there's a moment in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure where a muscle-bound vampire fights a martial artist wielding what I can only call magic sunlight breathing powers. And somehow that's not even the most fascinating thing that's happening on screen. What's truly revolutionary is how this scene, like countless others in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, completely reconstructs our understanding of masculine expression in anime and manga. So thank you again for joining me today. This is Reptaris on Ice, and today I'm talking about how JoJo's actually has helped redefine a lot of modern takes and a lot of modern sensibilities on masculinity. A lot of people look at this anime and they're like, wow, that looks really gay, and then, you know, they end up watching the show and loving it. So let's talk about why this is, and let's also talk about why the main protagonists of JoJo's are a lot less problematic examples of like positive masculinity than one would maybe find in older media, or even a lot of media now. As always, if you end up finding this video interesting, give me the 3-episode rule, watch 2 more of my videos, and if you end up liking those, and maybe consider hitting subscribe. I am now on my way to 3,000, which is completely crazy. So those of you who came from my Kendrick video, my last Kendrick video, this is going to be a very hard left turn, and this is going to be kind of a filter. We're going to kind of weed out some people here after this. So let's hit the intro and let's have a little fun. Step on it, daddy! So for the uninitiated, Hirohiko Araki's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is exactly what it says on the tin. Bizarre. It is a multi-generational epic spanning over 30 years of publication, following different members of the Joestar family, each nicknamed JoJo, as they face increasingly outlandish supernatural threats. But beneath the surface of its punching ghosts and vampire squirrels, which, yes, that really happens, JoJo's has quietly been staging a revolution in how manga and anime portray masculinity. So for starters, let's do a little thought experiment. I want you to think about your typical anime shonen protagonist. Chances are you're picturing somebody like Goku or Naruto or Jujutsu Kaisen, somebody powerful, determined, and while not exactly conforming to traditional masculinity, still operating within certain established perimeters of male heroic expression. With the example of Jujutsu Kaisen, because, you know, Jennifer Lawrence.
I like a tall woman with a nice big ass, like Grammy winner Megan Thee Stallion.
Now let's look at Giorno Giovanna, the protagonist of JoJo's Part 5. He is a teenage gang boss, mafia boss, with a heart-shaped chest window in his designer suit. His fighting style is turning bullets into butterflies, and his signature move involves just punching really fast and going muda muda muda. And all of this while striking a pose that would make Madonna just absolutely jealous. And he is also considered one of the most badass characters in manga history, at least as of now. And to me, that is the magic of JoJo's. It doesn't just push boundaries, it poses fabulously while leaping over them. So to understand how JoJo's revolutionized masculine expression in anime, we need to look at how Araki's art style evolved over time. It's like watching masculinity itself go through a glamorous metamorphosis of beef, cake, and beefcake. We start with Jonathan Joestar in Part 1. Set in Victorian England, he's built like a brick house that ate another brick house. He's mighty, he's just letting it all hang out. He has rippling muscles and a very noble-bearing personality, and he's a reflection of both the masculine ideals of his time period and the art style of classic muscle manga like Fist of the North Star. What scholars like Raywin Connell would call hegemonic masculinity is the culturally dominant form that legitimizes patriarchal power. This can be perfectly embodied in Dio Brando, who uses ruthless physical ambition and physical dominance to subjugate others. Like when I have to talk to my kids about toxic masculinity and not being a dick or anything like that, I have to remind them that the real strongest person in the room isn't the one who beats up other people. It's the one that protects people even when it's hard. Like, I want my kids to be able to grasp lessons at a young age that took me years of therapy to figure out, you know? But even here, Araki was already playing with our expectation. Jonathan isn't just a muscle-bound hero, he's a refined gentleman who spends as much time studying archaeology and practicing his table manners as he does training his body. He's as likely to quote poetry as he is to punch a zombie, and his relationship with Dio forms the perfect template for how JoJo would continue to subvert masculine tropes. Consider how Part 1 sets up its central conflict. Jonathan Joestar, the noble-born gentleman who embodies Victorian ideals of masculine virtue, versus Dio Brando, the ambitious social climber who represents a more traditionally masculine drive for power and dominance. In any other story of this era, Dio's ruthless ambition and seemingly superior strength would mark him as the protagonist. Instead, JoJo's presents Jonathan's emotional intelligence and capacity for love as his greatest strengths. When Dio tries to break Jonathan through social manipulation and physical dominance, classic toxic masculine behavior, Jonathan's response isn't to become more ruthless or cruel. Instead, he maintains his compassion and emotional openness while developing his strength. It's telling that his ultimate power, the ripple, comes from proper breathing, a power literally based on inner harmony rather than pure aggression. Even in their final battle, what makes Jonathan heroic isn't his superior strength or fighting ability, it's his capacity for empathy and sacrifice. He dies not in a blaze of glory defeating his enemy, but in an act of protection trying to essentially save Dio in a way. Through Jonathan, Araki established early on that true strength comes from embracing all aspects of oneself, not just the traditionally masculine ones. So if Part 1's Jonathan Joestar was Victorian masculinity cranked up to 11, Part 2's Joseph Joestar is what happens when you let Bugs Bunny read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Now here's a protagonist who treats every life or death battle like he's hosting an episode of Punk'd, and somehow it works out brilliantly, and I'm not going to explain that reference.
But check it out, I can completely remove my thumb! Doesn't anyone have a sense of humor left? Come on guys, this is funny stuff here!
At first glance, Joseph seems to fit the traditional action hero mold. He's got an impressive physique, he's got the quick wit, and he's got the kind of confidence that makes Dark Souls players think, yeah, I can probably make that jump. But where other shonen protagonists might rely on determination and training montages, Joseph's approach to heroism is more Bugs Bunny. This is a guy who will show up to a fight dressed in drag, predict the enemy's next line like he's reading from a script, and then win by using his opponent's assumptions about masculine pride against them. It's like watching someone speedrun toxic masculinity by exploiting every possible glitch in the system. Joseph's strategic cross-dressing is a perfect illustration of what Judith Butler calls gender performativity, the theory that gender is a series of performances creating the illusion of a stable identity. When Joseph dresses like a woman to infiltrate a Nazi base, he's not just using a clever disguise, he's weaponizing gender flexibility as a tactical advantage. Like my 7-year-old who has a very concerned obsession about horror, but a very surprising amount of insight into personal dynamics, she noted that he doesn't care if he looks silly if it helps him win, and that's actually really smart. Take the infamous fight with Pillar Man AC/DC, yes, that's really his name. In any other battle manga, the hero would overcome their ancient warrior through superior strength or a new secret technique. Joseph, he wins by essentially turning the battle into an elaborate game of stop hitting yourself, complete with that string tricks that would make Spider-Zero jealous. It's not just subversive at the time, it's just downright revolutionary in how it approaches combat in the Shonen series. But the real genius of Battle Tendency's approach to masculinity comes through in Joseph's relationship with Caesar Zeppeli. Here's where Araki really starts playing with expectations. Caesar was really, and I know I keep saying Caesar, I keep thinking of the original Japanese voiceover. So Says, Caesar initially appears as an elegant European foil to Joseph's American brashness. He's got the flowing scarf, he's got the perfectly coiffed hair, the refined bubble-based fighting style. He's basically what would happen if Eurovision became a person that learned Hamon. Their rivalry turned friendship challenges traditional depictions of masculine relationships in anime. And it wasn't by accident. In a 2014 JoJonium interview, Araki explicitly stated that after Part 1's antagonistic Jonathan-Dio relationship, he wanted to explore true rivalry and friendship through Caesar and Joseph. Weekly Shonen Jump is a shonen magazine after all, so I wanted to include something that portrayed positive friendship in a positive light. And what's particularly fascinating is how Araki used seemingly weak or feminine elements like bubbles, for example, as a way to subvert expectations about power and masculinity. Susan Napier's analysis of aesthetic resistance in anime perfectly captures what's happening here. Caesar's bubbles represent a rejection of traditional masculine power symbols in favor of something seemingly delicate yet devastatingly effective. As Araki explains, bubbles pop easily, so many of you may think of them as being fleeting. I like equipping characters with weapons with faults, and have them try to cover it through strategy. This deliberate choice to give Caesar an apparently fragile weapon, then show him turning that perceived weakness into strength, perfectly encapsulates JoJo's approach to masculinity. It's not about conforming to traditional ideas of powers, but about finding strength in what makes you unique. And also, bubbles being used as some of the most deadly weapons in the series is a pretty consistent theme from arc to arc. Even Caesar's iconic pose was loaded with meaning. When asked about it, Araki revealed that it was meant to convey a crucifixion, in other words, his future. Sort of a sense of preparedness of what is to come. This visual foreshadowing adds another layer to their relationship. While Joseph represents endless adaptability, Caesar embodies a kind of masculine nobility in accepting and facing one's fate. Their dynamic isn't about who's stronger or tougher, but about how different expressions of masculine strength can complement and support each other. This culminates in Caesar's tragic final battle and death scene, which stands as one of the most emotionally raw moments in the series. Joseph's reaction to losing his friend isn't stoic silence or masculine rage. It's genuine grief and tears, followed by a determination to carry on Caesar's will. It's a powerful statement that emotional vulnerability and masculine strength aren't mutually exclusive. And what makes Part 2 particularly fascinating is how it uses Joseph's cleverness and adaptability to challenge traditional masculine power fantasies. Our hero doesn't win through strength or even necessarily superior skill. He wins by being able to throw away his masculine pride and do whatever it takes to succeed. Whether that means as dressing as a woman to infiltrate a Nazi base, using his wits instead of his fists, or admitting he's completely out of his depth and utilizing the secret Joestar family technique. Joseph represents a new kind of action hero who is secure enough in his masculinity to not be bound by traditional rules. And to put a bow on this is perfectly exemplified in his final battle with Cars, where Joseph wins not through superior strength or some last-minute power-up, but through a combination of quick thinking, dumb luck, and being willing to look absolutely ridiculous in the process. It's as if Araki is saying that true strength isn't about maintaining some stoic masculine ideal. It's about being adaptable enough to transcend those limitations entirely. Through Joseph and Caesar, Part 2 establishes something very crucial about JoJo's approach to masculinity. It's not about rejecting traditional masculine traits, but about expanding what masculinity can even encompass. Even Araki's approach to different color design reflects this philosophy. As he notes in the JoJonian interview, he deliberately uses unexpected color combinations like aqua and pink and blue and white to create impact. It is the same principles he applies to his character. Unexpected combinations that challenge our preconceptions while also creating something entirely compelling and new. You can be strong and silly and clever and crass and emotional and effective. Your powers can come from bubbles or tricks and from facing your fate head-on or cleverly subverting it. In true JoJo fashion, why choose one approach when you can embrace them all? So if Part 2's Joseph Joestar was anime's Bugs Bunny, then that means that Part 3's Jotaro Kujo is what happens when you let Clint Eastwood loose in a Japanese high school drama. At first glance, he seems like the most conventionally masculine JoJo that we've seen yet. The stoic tough guy who communicates primarily through yada yada does and perfectly timed punches. He's basically every strong silent type trope rolled into one immaculately styled package. But I mean, this is JoJo's and nothing is ever quite what it seems. Thomas Baudenet's work on male relationship in Japanese media kind of helps illuminate what makes Jotaro's character so fascinating. He represents not simple emotional suppression, but strategic stoicism. When Jotaro does express concern or affection, these moments land with greater impact precisely because they break through his carefully maintained facade. It's like watching my neurodivergent 11-year-old who processes emotions very differently than my other kids, but still feels them no less deep. Like, for example, Jotaro's relationship with his mother, Holly. In any other anime, the tough guy protagonist's doting mom would be either a source of embarrassment or a motivation for revenge when something happens to her. But Jotaro's dynamic with Holly is actually a lot more nuanced than it seems. Sure, he acts annoyed by her affection and he calls her annoying woman, but his actions really do tell a different story. The entire plot of Stardust Crusaders is literally set in motion because this supposedly aloof teenager is so concerned about his mom's well-being, he's willing to travel halfway across the world and to fight an immortal vampire to save her. And Kakyeon thinks that she's hot, so he's gonna come join too. I mean, I don't blame him. That's why they call him the MILF Hunter. It's in these moments that we see how Jotaro actually represents a different kind of masculine strength, one that doesn't need to constantly prove itself through words or posturing. When Holly falls ill due to her stand, Jotaro doesn't make grand speeches about saving her. He doesn't swagger or boast. He simply acts, channeling all that stereotypical masculine energy into a single purpose: protecting somebody that he loves, and then protecting the people he ends up loving along the trip. The real stands were the friends that we made along the way. The Joseph-Jotaro dynamic isn't just a study in contrasting personalities, it's a masterclass in how masculine expression evolves across generations. Imagine if your extremely online, always posting boomer or Gen X dad had to go on a road trip with your Gen Z or Gen Alpha kid who communicates exclusively through lowercase k texts. That's basically the energy we're dealing with here, except instead of arguing about China, they're fighting vampires. Joseph, our resident hormone-breathing himbo from Part 2, is aged into the role of a wise silver fox. Sort of. He's still the same guy who'd rather trick his way out of a fight than punch through it, and he approaches every crisis with the energy of a theater kid who just discovered improv. But meanwhile, Jotaro processes everything with the emotional expression of a Nokia brick phone. Efficient and reliable, but not exactly known for its range of emojis. But here's where it gets interesting. Neither approach is presented as superior when Joseph starts hamming it up with his "oh my god" moments or his latest scheme. Jotaro's eye rolls aren't about rejecting his grandpa's approach to masculinity, they're just a grandson being eternally embarrassed by his extra-as-hell grandpa. And when Jotaro goes full stoic hero mode, Joseph doesn't try to force him to be more expressive. There's a mutual understanding that they're different people with different ways of expressing their strength. This generational divide in masculine expression actually becomes one of their greatest strengths. Joseph's theatrical problem solving and Jotaro's straight-to-the-point approach complement each other very perfect. It's like watching a buddy cop movie where one cop is actually the other's grandpa, and also they can punch ghosts. Their dynamic shows us that healthy masculine expression isn't about forcing everyone into the same mold. It's about finding your authentic voice and respecting others' right to do the same as well. What makes this especially powerful is how it plays into their shared mission to save Holly. Joseph's dramatic displays of concern and Jotaro's quiet determination aren't competing narratives. They're two sides of the same coin, both men channeling their masculine energy into protecting and caring, just expressing it in radically different ways. It's a beautiful reminder that there is no right way to be a man or to show love for your family. There's a bajillion wrong ways, don't get me wrong, but there is no one right way. Also, talk to your partner too. But what is particularly clever about Jotaro's character is how Araki uses his silence as a tool for emotional expression rather than suppression. When Jotaro does speak, it matters. His rare moment of verbal expression, whether it is expressing disgust at Dio's actions or showing subtle appreciation for his allies, carry more weight precisely because they break through his usual reserve. It's like he's teaching a masterclass in the difference between stoicism and emotional suppression. One is a choice of expression and the other is a fear of it. Even his signature stand, Star Platinum, reflects this duality. On the surface, it's the most straightforwardly masculine stand we've ever seen. It punches things really hard and really fast, but it's also incredibly precise and capable of tasks requiring delicacy and finesse. Much like Jotaro himself, its strength comes not just from raw power, but from knowing when and how to apply said power. As for style, because this is still JoJo's after all, Jotaro manages to make a high school uniform look like it's haute couture. His carefully coordinated appearance isn't treated as contradictory to his tough guy persona. If anything, it enhances it. This is a character who can rock a designer-looking school uniform, complete with chains and a hat that defies both gravity and logic, while maintaining his status as one of anime's most intimidating protagonists. In many ways, Jotaro represents JoJo's commentary on the performance of masculinity itself. His tough guy act is exactly that. It's an act, but one that's no less authentic for being consciously adopted. The beauty of Jotaro's character is that he never really changes his basic nature. He doesn't really have some dramatic revelation that makes him suddenly emotionally expressive like his grandfather. Instead, we as the audience learn to read between the lines and to understand that sometimes the most powerful expressions of love and loyalty don't need flowery speeches or dramatic declarations. Sometimes they just need a quiet yada yada days and the willingness to walk through hell for the people that you care about. So I'm not gonna lie, part 4 hits kinda different when you watch it as a parent. On the surface, it's a story about a small town teenage stand user with their own fabulous hair hunting down a local serial killer with a hand fetish. Nothing new here. But beneath that wonderfully bizarre exterior lies one of the most nuanced explorations of gender masculinity and family responsibility in mainstream anime. Those of you who are familiar with the work of Jack Halberstam on alternative masculinities will see that Diamond is Unbreakable is really a good case study for it. It presents masculinity not as a fixed set of traits, but an evolving relational practice that changes across generations. This plays out through 3 generations of Joestars. Joseph, the elderly father dealing with the consequences of past infidelity, Jotaro, the stoic mentor figure trying to balance responsibility with emotional distance, and Josuke, our protagonist who has to navigate his own identity while processing some very seriously complicated family dynamics. It's like watching a very bizarre episode of Family Therapy where everyone has supernatural powers and an amazing fashion sense. So let's really quickly talk about the elephant in the room. Joseph Joestar's infidelity. Now, as someone who really enjoyed Joseph's character up until this point, finding out about this moment kinda hits like finding out your cool uncle's Facebook posts are actually, in hindsight, pretty problematic. The revelation that this character that we enjoyed and loved, who embodied such positive aspects of masculine expression in part 2, cheated on his wife and had a secret child. It's a gut punch. It complicates our view of Joseph's character in ways that really can't be hand-waved away with a clever one-liner or an expertly timed, "Oh no!" But here's where part 4 shows its maturity. It doesn't try to excuse or simplify the situation. Instead, it uses this messy reality to explore how different generations process and express emotional complexity. Josuke's journey of coming to terms with his father's identity isn't about forgiveness or rejection. It's about finding his own path to emotional maturity. So, in addition to part 4 being a masterclass in processing family generational trauma, the friendship between Josuke Higashikita and Okuyasu Nijimura, it is like watching the world's most wholesome stoner comedy break out in the middle of a supernatural soap opera. The relationship doesn't just subvert typical shonen friendship tropes. it practically takes those tropes out for coffee and has a really healthy discussion with it about emotional intelligence. Let's start with Okuyasu because, holy hell, this kid's backstory reads like somebody threw a dart at a board of tragic anime character backgrounds and hit the bullseye like 3 times in a row. Dad turned into an immortal blob thanks to Dio? Yes, absolutely check. Older brother processing his trauma through increasingly questionable life choices. Absolutely, it's the kind of origin story that usually creates either a tragic villain or an endlessly brooding anti-hero. Instead, we get Okuyasu, It's basically what happens if a golden retriever became a human and then that human got a stand. His initial attempt to murder Josuke, which, I mean, let's be real, this is how most JoJo friendships start out, could be seen as a very typical rival dynamic. You know, the kind two tough guys butting heads until they eventually respect each other, but never actually expressing it without punching something first. But that's not what happens. When Josuke offers understanding rather than judgment, we get something revolutionary in Shonen. Two teenage boys actually talking about their feelings, not through metaphorical battles, not through rival declarations, just two kids bonding over their shared experience of complicated father figures and family drama that would make Jerry Springer say, hey, let's maybe dial it back a little bit. Their friendship becomes a very beautiful example of how young men can support each other emotionally without compromising their authentic selves. Okuyasu doesn't suddenly become less of a lovable dumbass, and Josuke doesn't stop being hypersensitive about his hair. Instead, they create this space where they can just be themselves, whether that means sharing a meal at Tonio's, still the best cooking episode in anime history, facing down serial killers together, or just hanging out and processing their respective family traumas. It's like watching toxic masculinity get Crazy Diamond into something healthier. The cracks are still there and they're still visible, but they get to be a part of something stronger and a lot more beautiful. Like, to get a little analytical with it, Josuke's standability itself really becomes a perfect metaphor for what psychoanalyst Carl Jung might call shadow integration. Crazy Diamond can heal broken things but can't completely erase past damage. And I mean, as a dad that is trying to break his own generational and parental cycles that were modeled for me growing up, this actually really hits home. We can't really erase our generational wounds, but we can acknowledge them and create something better moving forward. The cracks remain visible, but they become a part of something stronger. When you strip away all the macho posturing and just let guys be friends, they can be emotional without being a whole thing TM. They can support each other without losing their edge. They can process their trauma without turning it into a competition about who had it worse. I hate it when people do that. And they can do it all while maintaining their status as two of the most badass stand users in Morio. In a series full of complex father-son relationships, Josuke and Okuyasu at the very least show us the healing power of brotherhood. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind that you choose. Their friendship isn't about rivalry or power dynamics. It's about two guys who've both been dealt a pretty bizarre hand in life and finding genuine connection and supporting each other through it. And maybe that's the most revolutionary thing about their friendship. It makes emotional intelligence look as cool as any other stand power. Here's a 16-year-old kid who has every right to be angry, who could easily fall into typical teenage rebellion tropes or angsty revenge plots. Instead, he shows a level of emotional intelligence that would put most adult characters to shame. I'm talking to you, Shane from The Walking Dead. He's able to acknowledge the reality of who his father is without letting it define him or poison his capacity for caring about others. This maturity manifests in fascinating ways through his stand Crazy Diamond, and his power to fix things could easily be read as compensating for his broken family situation, but instead it really ends up becoming a symbol of his capacity to heal without erasing the reality of what happened. He can't undo the past, those cracks will always show, but he can help create something meaningful from the remains. Jotaro's presence really adds another layer to this generational exploration. Now he's no longer the main protagonist, he's evolved into a mentor figure who's trying to balance his natural stoicism with the need to provide guidance. His interactions with Josuke show how masculine emotional expression can evolve. He's still not exactly warm and fuzzy, but he's learned to communicate care and respect in his own way. It's like watching your emotionally distant dad try to connect with your kids. The effort itself becomes its own form of expression. And I mean, that's the beauty of Part 4's approach to these family dynamics, is that it never seeks easy resolution. Joseph's relationship with Josuke doesn't end in either complete reconciliation or total rejection. It exists in that messy, complicated space where real family relationships often live. Josuke doesn't have to forgive to move forward, and he doesn't have to forget to find peace. He just has to process it in his own way and at his own pace. The generational triptych gives us three very different models of masculine expression. Joseph's declining bravado, now tinged with regret, Jotaro's evolved stoicism learning to accommodate mentorship, and Josuke's fresh approach that somehow manages to be both more emotionally mature and more fabulous than either of their predecessors. And together they also show how masculinity isn't a fixed point, but a conversation between generations, with each generation learning and reacting to those who came before and those who came after. Josuke represents something that we are starting to see more and more in younger generations, and that's the ability to acknowledge family trauma without being defined by it, and to process complex emotions without sacrificing your authentic self or your amazing sense of style. Also, probably one of the most visually obvious and jarring things you notice between Part 3 and Part 4 is the art style. It goes from a very almost traditional anime art style to something that is, well, the sky is pea yellow. The evolution of JoJo's character designs between parts 3 and 4 also wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a reflection of masculinity itself getting a cultural makeover. The shift from Stardust Crusaders' muscle-bound titans to Diamond Is Unbreakable's fashion-forward stand users parallel a broader transformation that was happening in 90s pop culture, when society collectively decided that maybe, just maybe, guys could care about their appearance without surrendering their quote-unquote man card, whatever the hell that means. Think about the cultural landscape of the early to mid-90s. We have Kurt Cobain making floral dresses and smeared eyeliner look more rebellious than leather and spikes ever did. Visual kai bands in Japan were treating gender presentation like a suggestion rather than the rule. And Prince had been living his best purple life for years at this point, basically serving as a one-man preview of what JoJo's characters' designs would eventually become and what a stand user in real life looks like. Purple rain, purple rain. Even mainstream action heroes were evolving. We went from Schwarzenegger's bulging biceps to Brad Pitt's lean Tyler Durden in the span of a decade. As Patrick Galbraith notes on his work in Japanese pop culture, this era was marked by Japan's economic bubble bursting, creating space for more experimental approaches to gender and identity in media. It's like JoJo's and 90s pop culture were having the same conversation about masculine expression, just in different mediums. While Western media was discovering that men could rock guy liner and still be taken seriously, pour one out for every guy who discovered makeup through The Crow, by the way, just putting that out there. JoJo's was teaching anime fans that your protagonist could care about their hair more than their bench press max and still be an absolute badass. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about expanding the possibilities of what masculinity could be. The 90s saw a rise of the metrosexual movement, and boy bands weren't afraid to show their sensitive sides. We had silk shirt R&B, and Japanese pop culture was increasingly embracing more fluid gender presentation. Remember, this was the decade when Final Fantasy VII gave us Cloud Strife in a dress, and somehow that made him even cooler. By the time that Golden Wind rolled around in the late 90s, the manga, the series had essentially become a perfect crystallization of this changing approach to masculine presentation. Giorno and his gang weren't just fighting supernatural battles, they were serving looks that embodied the new understanding of gender expression. Their designs suggested that being powerful and that being beautiful weren't mutually exclusive, that being a fearsome gangster and having a heart-shaped chest window in your outfit like Power Girl could still absolutely go together. And looking back on this evolution now as a millennial parent, watching my kids consume media that increasingly embraces more fluid gender expression, it's really fascinating to see how ahead of its time JoJo really was. While other shonen series were still largely sticking to traditional masculine design tropes, Araki was out here drawing male characters that looked like they could step off the page and onto a Milan runway, and in a way they did. He wasn't just following the cultural conversation about gender expression, he was helping to lead it. And speaking of being ahead of the curve, we're about to talk about part 6 where Araki said, you know what would be really bizarre? Having a female protagonist in a shonen series in the year 2000. But that's a whole other revolution in itself. So part 4 dipped its toe into the waters of more gender-fluid character design, but part 5 dove in headfirst wearing a Versace swimsuit and somehow made the water even gayer than frogs. Golden Wind represents a moment where JoJo's aesthetic evolution reaches its logical, fabulous conclusion. So what would happen if you would let a high fashion runway show organize a crime family? The series started treating personal style as an extension of character rather than just costume design. Going back to Susan Napier and her analysis of costume as a site of rebellion against societal norms, this perfectly encapsulates what's happening in Golden Wind. These characters aren't just wearing outfits, they're engaging with what Napier calls aesthetic resistance, using their visual presentation to challenge dominant power structures. The gang's flamboyant fashion choices become political statements against rigid gender expectations, and all of this while they're also taking down the Italian mafia. And I think that this story is also where JoJo's truly transcends traditional gender expression in anime. The main cast of Golden Wind exists in this beautiful space where masculinity and femininity aren't opposing forces, but complementary elements of personal style. Bucciarati rocks a white suit covered in zippers that logically shouldn't work, but they still do, and doing all this while emanating a very strong team mom energy. Team mom, not teen mom. Narancia combines very teenage boyish energy with an aesthetic that wouldn't be out of place in a K-pop group. And Mista's crop top and beanie combo somehow makes both high fashion and paranoid superstition just look absolutely cool. And, mid-drift. And let's dig into these character designs just a little bit more real quick because they really are interesting in how they approach gender expression. In Golden Wind, the characters embrace a almost Renaissance-like inspired androgyny. They're beautiful in a way that really transcends traditional gender boundaries. Think Michelangelo's David starting a streetwear brand. But it's not just about the aesthetics. Golden Wind uses this visual evolution to explore deeper themes of identity and self-expression. Take Giorno himself. He is literally the son of Dio. Insert vampire daddy issues here. But instead of either rejecting or embracing that legacy, he creates his own unique identity. His stand power isn't about hindering or reversing like Dio's The World is. Giorno's stand power is about creation and giving life, growing instead of regressing. He takes the inherited capacity for ruthlessness and transforms it into something more nuanced, more beautiful, kind of like what the series does with traditional masculine tropes throughout the years. The found family dynamic of Bucciarati's gang adds another layer of this exploration to masculine identity. We have a group of traumatized teenagers and young adults who create their own support system outside of traditional family structures. Their emotional bonds aren't weaknesses to be hidden under tough guy facades or openly acknowledged as sources of strength. Like, when was the last time you saw a mafia story where the character's emotional vulnerability was treated just as important as their ability to win fights? This culminates in some of the most emotionally raw moments in the series. Characters cry openly, express their love and loyalty without ironic distance, and they process their trauma through both action and dialogue. The fact that they can do all of this while looking absolutely fabulous isn't incidental. It's a part of the point. Golden Wind shows us that true strength isn't about fitting in the traditional masculine boxes, but having the courage to express your authentic self, whatever that means. Wearing haute couture into a stand battle or showing general emotional vulnerability with your chosen family. Even the villains reflect this evolution in how JoJo's approaches gender expression and identity. Diavolo, with his split personality, Doppio represents different aspects of masculine presentation, while minor antagonists like Squalo and Tiziano show that even the bad guys can have healthy, emotional, supportive relationships. The series doesn't treat their expression or relationships as jokes or weaknesses, they're just part of who they are. In many ways, Golden Wind does feel like a lot more nuanced expression in regards to male gender expression. It takes the evolutionary steps from Diamond is Unbreakable, slimmer designs, fashion-forward aesthetics, and pushes them to their logical extreme. The result is something that is truly unique. A story where traditional masculine power fantasy elements like mob violence and supernatural battles coexist seamlessly with emotional vulnerability and gender-fluid expression. Alright, so if parts 4 and 5 were JoJo's giving masculinity a makeover, 6 is when you take everything that you've learned from the series as a whole in regards to like gender binary and gender expression, and then you just throw it out the window, yada yada dawa. Stone Ocean doesn't just feature a female protagonist in a shonen series, which was revolutionary enough for 2000, I remember like 25 years ago. It actively interrogates every assumption that we've built up about gender and power within the JoJo universe. Jolyne Kujo isn't just Jotaro's daughter, she's the natural evolution of everything JoJo had been building towards in its gender exploration of gender expression. Gender. As someone who applies what Halberstam calls female masculinity, Jolyne inherits her father's stoic strength and her grandfather's strategic mind, but expresses these traits in her own unique way. It's like watching 3 generations of character development crystallize into an entirely new person. Remember how we talked about Giorno and company pushing the boundaries of masculine presentation? Well, Jolyne and her crew take that energy and just run with it in every possible direction. The main cast of Stone Ocean exists in this fascinating space where traditional gender roles feel about as relevant as a DVD rewinder. I'm not going to explain that joke. You've got Jolyne displaying both traditionally feminine and masculine traits without treating them as contradictions. Hermes brings a kind of strength that doesn't need to perform to either traditional femininity or masculinity as well. And then you have characters like Weather Report and Anasui continuing the series' evolution towards increasingly fluid presentation. And speaking of Anasui, let's talk about that character's design evolution real quick. Originally in the manga, Anasui is presented as female before being redesigned as male just like some part of the way through. I just realized I didn't look up why. Anasui represents perhaps the most explicit example of how far JoJo's had come in its approach to gender expression. It's a journey that would continue to evolve with characters like Scarlet Valentine in Part 7 and the first openly transgender character in the JoJo lands. This progression feels very natural though, given how the series had consistently pushed boundaries in regards to representation of gender identity. From Part 5's fluid presentation to Part 6's dismantling of gender roles, JoJo's has always been building towards more inclusive and nuanced portrayals of gender expression. But what makes Stone Ocean particularly fascinating is how it handles the father-daughter relationship between Jotaro and Jolyne. Remember our stoic boy from Part 3? The one who could barely express emotion without adding an insult? Now he's a father trying to protect his daughter while dealing with his own emotional limitations. It's like watching toxic masculinity go to family therapy, and let's be real, that's exactly what this is. As Julia Kristeva might frame it on her work on Woman's Time, Jolyne's journey represents a break from the patriarchal time, Jotaro's linear duty-bound path, and it evolves into a more cyclical relational understanding of power. When Jotaro sacrifices himself to save Jolyne, it's not just a plot point, it's a symbolic passing of the torch from a patriarchal heroism to a more feminine-coded form of strength. Jotaro's journey in Part 6 shows us what's possible when a man finally swallows his pride and confronts his emotional limitations head-on. It gets messy and complicated because growth always is, but it's absolutely necessary for breaking down generational cycles. The fact that it takes literal time-stopping powers and a prison break for Jotaro to work on his emotional availability is both perfectly on brand for JoJo's and a very painfully accurate metaphor for how hard it can be for men to take that first step forward towards vulnerability. And I saw echoes of this with my father meeting my first 2 kids. He passed away, unfortunately, before he got to meet my other ones, but it definitely had its moments where you could kind of see that things were clicking for him because he had a granddaughter. That was his first granddaughter, my first daughter as well. So it was also very illuminating for me as well. And you could definitely tell that he had to kind of reconcile with a lot of his past toxic masculinity and having to view it now through a different lens because of the fact that he had a granddaughter in his life. But the dynamics of Jotaro and Jolyne really become perfect for examining this lens on how gender roles and emotional expressions evolve across generations. Jolyne inherits Jotaro's strength but not his emotional constraints, and she can be as tough as her father while still being open and expressing her feelings. Whether it be love, rage, or determination, it's like she took the emotional groundwork that was laid by characters like Josuke and Giorno and built her own with it. And I think that's the genius of Stone Ocean, is how it takes everything JoJo had established about gender expression, from Jonathan's noble masculinity to Giorno's fluid presentation, and shows that these traits aren't inherently gendered at all. Strength, vulnerability, style, and determination, like these aren't masculine or feminine traits, they're human traits. And they're human traits that we've artificially sorted into gendered boxes. And in many ways, Stone Ocean both feels like a culmination and a new beginning for JoJo's exploration of gender. And yeah, you saw the end of the season of Stone Ocean, you're probably smirking at that new beginning line, 4 balls of respect to you. If you hadn't read the manga yet, that won't make sense. It takes the series' increasingly fluid approach to gender expression and pushes it to the final conclusion. If men can be beautiful and feminine while still being strong, then women can absolutely embody traditionally masculine traits while maintaining their own identity. If Giorno can rock a heart-shaped chest window, then Jolyne can both be tough as nails and emotionally expressive. And I mean, looking across all 6 animated parts, we can really see how beautiful this evolution is and how JoJo's approaches gender and identity. From Jonathan's Victorian masculine ideals through Joseph's theatrical strength, Jotaro's stoic power, and Josuke's emotional openness. And we have Giorno's fluid presentation, and finally Jolyne's complete transcendence of traditional gender roles. It's like watching society's understanding of gender expression evolve and fast forward, and it has a lot more supernatural punching, which makes it inherently cooler. And maybe that is the most bizarre adventure of all of this, watching how a series that really started as a relatively straightforward masculine power fantasy evolve into pop culture's most interesting exploration of gender expression and identity, through increasingly fabulous character designs, complex storytelling, and a willingness to challenge traditional gender roles. JoJo's hasn't just reflected changes in how we think about gender, it's helped push those changes forward, just with more punching. And I mean, a lot of this reminds me of how I watch my kids engage with media and with each other as well. When my kids game or do things like role-playing games or anything like that, they aren't sitting there thinking about, oh, do I have to be a guy or I have to be a girl or anything like that. They just do what they want. They don't care. And I made sure that I raised them that way. The beauty of JoJo's evolution is how it mirrors what's happening in real families. Each generation learning from, reacting to, and ultimately transcending the limitations of those who came before. And as someone who is raising 4 neurodivergent kids in an increasingly complex world, I find something profoundly hopeful in this narrative. It suggests that even the most entrenched patterns can be broken, that we can acknowledge our past while creating something new and more beautiful from it. And look, I realize that we have barely scratched the surface here on all things JoJo's. We could do whole videos about stand abilities. We could do whole videos about how stand abilities evolved from Punch Ghost Go Burr to complex metaphors from personal identity and growth. We could spend hours analyzing the supporting cast journeys, pour one out for Narancia, the boy who just wanted some math tutoring, and don't even get me started on things like how Araki eventually got better at writing women. He's not perfect, but there's a lot there. And also, you know, Dio and his relationship with Pucci, and the really they were roommates vibe that I got from them. And yeah, I think that you guys just really need to watch the anime and then read the manga. That's where I'm at now, because we've already been going long enough. The point is that JoJo's is like one of those giant novelty parfaits that they serve in Japanese parfaits, you know, melon ones, wink wink, nudge nudge. Every layer that you dig through reveals something new and increasingly bizarre. For my kids' generations, watching JoJo's isn't about seeing traditional ideas of masculinity or femininity in action. It's about seeing people be unapologetically themselves, whether that means punching vampires while crying manly tears, or healing your friends while rocking the world's most aggressive pompadour. Or, you know, turning your life energy into zippers because fashion is also a very perfectly valid form of combat. And in a world that still often tries to force people into rigid gender boxes, that might be the most powerful stand ability of all. Not the zippers, but being yourself. The revolution that JoJo's has staged over its multi-decade run isn't about making male characters more fabulous or introducing female protagonists in Shonen, though both are significant achievements in their own right. It's about showing generations of readers and viewers that authentic self-expression transcends gender boundaries entirely. And in doing so, Araki didn't just create a bizarre adventure, he created a roadmap for generations to come, showing that the most revolutionary act might just be embracing your own unique brand of bizarre. Thank you for making it this far if you did. Like, I am serious, because this is the longest video that I have made in a while. Let me know what you think. Like I said, I have so many things I could talk about JoJo. I have so many things I could talk about, like a lot of different shows. It kills me. And you know what? I am more than happy to talk about these things as we get more subscribers. So now the new goal is 3,000. I will say right now, because we're getting there, 5,000 is probably where I'm going to start opening things up more in regards of getting support to do larger videos and stuff like that. So I guess now my new stretch goal is 5,000. And also at that point, then I can also start making like more series and stuff like that. So yeah, if all that sounds awesome to you, then hit like, hit subscribe, share this with your JoJo friends, share this with your JoJo enemies, because Stan users always find each other inevitably. And just Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to talk about. Let me know what you think about this video. Let me know what you think about JoJo's. Let me know what you think about other animes. And let me know what you think about just everything in general. Also, if you just want to use the comments to just kind of scream into the void, you're more than welcome to do so. Just, support other people screaming into the void. If one person screams into the void, reply with screaming into the void in their void, and then also start your own void to scream into, and then it'll just be a whole bunch of comments of people just going, "Argh!" So, yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate your time. My throat hurts. I was going to try to record my next video, but we'll see. Okay, bye.